Welcome to another segment of provocative conversations destined to provoke further thought and spark greater questions regarding God, church, and the religious establishments of both the past and the present. I am the proud heretic, Mr. Provocateur himself. Hello, I am the proud heretic, here to provoke you to greater thought, into greater conceptual notions, to help you to perhaps perceive in a more mature sense, through a more mature light of things. Well, I'm still on the divine season of the pandemic. We're on the subtopic of the prophetic utterances that God gave me regarding people hearing this message, in which he stated to me on multiple occasions regarding people's inability, unwillingness to hear, their rebellion, their rejection, their continuance in all that they have been doing even prior to the pandemic, and how even the situations and the circumstances that they're now in, that the world is now in, people are still not desiring to hear, or rather, and how people will not change despite what will happen. So many people have said to me, I've heard, I'll say multiple people say to me, these people, they make me mad. They're not doing what they should do. They're not covering their faces. They're not doing this and they're not doing that. And I said, yes, and don't look for them to do it, because God already stated to me that they won't. These people will not change. Sure, there'll be some who will change, but I'm not focusing on that. That'll be what that will be. I'm focusing on what God stated to me. Sometimes you just can't tell certain people anything. They always want to get the exception and then build the rule upon the exception, really so as to downplay what you've stated, what you've said, in order to somehow have this twisted form of being right themselves, when in actuality, they're actually disregarded. If someone is saying that God is saying, and how would I say that? Be careful on what you're saying that God is not saying. Now, when you know that what is being said is being rightly applied to the reality, and the reality looks more like what is being said than not, you be careful on how you say what God is not saying. Now, it is true that, say like with Trump, President Trump, people are saying, the church is saying, I saw a vision that he's going to live, or not live, but he's going to become president the second time, and that he'll be here, that God is pleased with him, and God is whatever and whatever, whatever. And then you have another group saying, President Trump will lose this presidency. He will not win the presidency. Well, if you're convinced that he will win, then you're going to more likely than not follow the crowd that says he's going to win. If you're convinced that he's going to lose, you may more than likely follow the crowd that says differently, that says that he will lose, he will not win. Just to make the record clear, I will say to you what God said to me, even though I've already given that when I spoke in regards to the President of the United States and the politicians, and when I spoke to the church, or gave what God spoke to me to the church. I already made it clear what I heard. However, I will say it again. Donald Trump will not be in office. He will lose his presidency. or this presidency, he will no longer be fit to be in office. It wasn't ever that he was actually fit intellectually, spiritually, or even morally. He was morally bankrupt from the beginning. He didn't become morally bankrupt. He was already there. However, God does what God does, and he uses who and what he uses, and that's who God used. But just because God uses you, I said it from the night that he won his presidency, don't be fooled. Just because God is using you doesn't mean a thing. It really doesn't. God uses sticks. God uses toilets. God uses plumbing systems. God uses sewage systems. And so what? So what? Just because God uses you, that doesn't mean what you may think it means. But anyway, we'll keep going. God said to me that this is a period where self-destruction will become the norm. Self-destruction in the sense that people will not want to hear. People will not want to listen. And because they don't want to hear, because they don't want to listen, they're going to self-destruct. Because they're going to continue living the way that they've always lived. They're going to continue on with life the way that they've always continued on. Because of that, they will self-destruct. Their self-destruction, he says, will become the norm. People won't listen. They're not going to change. They're not going to heed to the messages. They're going to keep going forward. They're not going to listen to the doctors. They're not listen to the authorities, the health officials. Self-destruction will be the norm for this season, which is why God says you are seeing so many people go against what is being spoken to them. He says this will be a season where self-destruction will be the order of the day. He says you are seeing nothing new in the people. People's behavior is not new. People's attitudes are not new. People are only showing who they have always been, even when it comes to the church. There's nothing new about the church. The church has always been rebellious, rebels. Even if you want to go to the Bible and pull from there during the days of Isaiah and Jeremiah, the days of Daniel, all during the days of the children of Israel during the wilderness experience. And you go back into the days of Joshua, the children of Israel, the people, the so-called people have always been rebels. So people are not behaving differently. They're all behaving according. The virus didn't necessarily create a behavior. The virus, the pandemic exposed that which was already in existence in people. It exposed, it brought to the forefront for all to see what people are made of, who people actually are, how they truly believe. People are only showing who they truly have always been, God says. He says the people will continue to be who they truly were. People will continue to show who they truly are. He says people are set in their positions. You see Donald Trump set in his position. You see the politicians set in their positions. You see the church set in their positions. You see the people out and about set in their positions. He says people are set on doing what they are used to doing. You don't tell us we'll storm your Capitol. We'll storm the mayor's office, the governor's office, the governor's mansion. We'll storm the courts. We'll storm hearings. We'll storm wherever we choose to storm. You don't tell us what we won't do, and we'll come in there with our guns. God says, though this season will change certain people, People have been prideful and rebellious before the pandemic. Listen, let me say this again. Though this season will change certain people, God says certain people are going to change. He says, but people who have been prideful and rebellious before the pandemic will continue as they were prior to the pandemic, prior to this season. He says this pandemic will not change such people. If you're looking for the pandemic to be the change all of people, of individuals, of people's hearts, it's not going to happen. That's why people are still where they are. That's why we have a president who is still where he is. Now, again, I am neither Republican nor Democrat. I am speaking forth the truth. I'm speaking in power, truth to power, to the powers that be. I am not against your candidacy as much as I am against the wrong of a matter, regardless of what side it's on, blue or red. I do not have a dog in the fight. This pandemic will not change such people, God says. This season will not alter the behavior of certain people. No matter what occurs in this season, certain people are just not going to change. Their ways, he said, are set. Their ways are already set. This season will harden such people. Certain people are going to be hardened by this season, not changed due to this season, but hardened by this season. The church is becoming hardened by this season. They were already hardened. The president is becoming hardened by this season. He and even great members of the church contracted the virus, supposedly. Okay, he supposedly. I question that. But they've contracted the virus, and you would think that you would have humbled yourself. Even he said, I get it. You get what? The coughs and sneezes that come with it? Because you surely didn't get it to the point of change or doing anything differently. Their ways are already set. This season will harden such people, he says. This season will only harden them to continue as they have always presented themselves to be. He said there must be a distinction. There must be a distinction made between those who live in accordance with the virus and those who do not. See, right now, people, a distinction is being made between those who are obedient and those who are not, those who are submitted and those who are rebels, between those who discern and those who do not, between those who hear the voice of God and see the hand of God and those who do not. There must be a distinction, God says. There must be a distinction made between those who live in accordance with the virus and those who do not. In other words, those who live in accordance with the rules and the guidelines regarding the virus or as it relates to the virus and those who do not. He said there must be a distinction between those who are listening to the advice of the medical authorities and those who are not. He says the distinction will be clearly set and seen. The distinction will be clearly recognized, and you can recognize who belongs to what camp of belief. He says people will have great consequences to their actions during this season. The consequences during this season will be great. The consequences that people will suffer due to their own activity and even their inactivity during this season will be great. He says those who go with the flow of this season will get through this season. Those who go with the flow of this season will get through this season. Those who adhere to the advice of this season will be spared in this season. But those who continue to do what they are so pleased to do during this season will see devastating consequences. Let me say that again. Those who will continue to do as they are so pleased to do, as they are accustomed to doing, not changing anything, not doing anything differently. He says, those who continue to do what they are so pleased to do during this season will see devastating consequences. He says, heed to the warnings, heed to the advice, go with the flow. Go with the flow of this season. Go in conjunction with the flow. God said to me on July the 3rd. July the 3rd, God spoke to me, and God said to me some things, but I want to give the backdrop of what was going on for God to say what he said to me. This message resulted from the subtle rejection that I had been receiving from nearly everyone that I attempted to express in brief what God is doing in this pandemic season. No matter who I attempted to tell regarding what is occurring, those individuals simply rejected my words from every angle and on every level. Those individuals had no regard for what I was saying to them in relation to what God had been saying to me regarding this season, which disturbed me greatly, more so in a sad way though. I was saddened and disturbed by several observed things. People's blindness to what is going on, people's deafness to the voice of God, people's hardness of heart toward the actual workings of God, people's adamant stance within their religious views, and people's level of pride and arrogance and rebellion in general. I was floored by that. And in that, God began to speak to me, and he said to me, do not take it to heart when the people begin to defend the church. Do not take it to heart when the people begin to defend the stand of the church. Do not get upset at the people's defense. The people's defense is due to their dullness of hearing, due to their ignorance, due to their fear. The people are fearing what they are hearing. They're fearing what they are seeing. They're fearing what they are sensing. He says, you do not need to worry about who does not hear. Whoever does not hear is not to be your concern. Your concern is to be about you continuing to say what you are to say. So despite others hearing, despite what others will say, despite how others will mock what I'm saying, God says that ain't even to be your concern. Your concern is to be about you continuing to say what you are to say. He says, do not get disturbed when others do not hear you. Do not get disturbed over it. People are going to continue to do what people do. He says people are going to continue to think what people are going to think. But you continue to speak to them. You just make sure that you continue to speak to them and tell them what you know. And that's why I speak. That's why I did all of these messages. I told you, God said, that people will not hear. I told you that people are not going to hear you. People are not going to hear what they are to hear. The people's hearing is dull. The people's hearing has become dull. The people's hearing has been dulled through their religion. The people's religion has caused their hearing to become dull. Their religion has dulled their ability to hear. People are no longer interested in hearing. People are no longer interested in what is being said. People are no longer interested in what I am saying. What I am saying is no longer of any interest to people. The people are no longer interested in me or in what I have to say. So if the people are not interested in what God has to say, then truly people will not be interested in what I have to say. Jesus made a statement during his time on earth, as it is stated in the book. He says, if they hear me, then they'll hear you. They reject you because they rejected me. He says people are not interested in knowing what they do not know. People are not interested in knowing what they do not know. People don't care that they don't know what God is doing. People don't care that they don't know that the hand of God is in this. People are not caring for what does not benefit them from their standpoint. God says you are dealing with people who think they know. You are dealing with people who have become complacent in what they know. He says knowing what is going on does not interest the people of this day. He said you are dealing with people who are not interested in knowing. He says you are dealing with people who do not concern themselves with what they do not know. He says knowing what is going on is just not their interests. People are not interested in the current state of things. He says people are not interested in the affairs of this season. He says people are only interested in doing what they already know to do. They are only interested in doing what they have always done. This is what I know. This is what I do. This is how I behave, and don't look for me to do differently. It is not that I am not speaking to the people, God says, because I am. I am speaking to them. I am through other people, but the people will not hear. They will not heed to what they are hearing. He says the people are incapable of discerning what they are hearing. Their discernibility is broken. The people's discernment is inoperative. Their discernment is in an inoperative state. The people are no longer able to hear because of their inability to discern. The people are dysfunctional in their discernment because of their religion. I'll say that again. The people are dysfunctional in their discernment because of their religion. Their religion has caused them to be dysfunctional in their discernment. People's religion has gotten in the way of their hearing. Religion has dulled the people's ability to hear correctly. The people are unable to hear because they are unable to discern what they hear. People are conjuring the thoughts that come to them naturally, God says. They're conjuring up their own natural reality. They don't want to actually know what's going on. They conjure up their own reality. People are conjuring their own beliefs to form their own reality. He says people are being left to their own beliefs. People's own beliefs are leading them. Their own beliefs are fueling them and causing them to be misled. People's thoughts are off base. People are off base in their thinking. People's thoughts are off center. Spiritual center. People are continuing to think what is natural for them to think. People are continuing to do as they have always done. People are continuing to do that which is natural to them to do. People's thoughts are reminiscent of their own physical reality. There is true reality, and then there is a true reality of what you yourself conjure up in your own psyche, regardless of the physical evidence that speaks otherwise. People's thoughts are reminiscent of their own physical reality. People are continuing to fill themselves with their own physical reality, which is void of spiritual reality. People's thoughts are void of spiritual reality. Physically, if you look outside, people, you cannot see necessarily what is going on. But there is a spiritual reality about the physical. People's true reality is perceived through their physical reality. So you say, this is what is true, what is here, and what you cannot see. You say, this is what is true. This is what the reality is. When in actuality, the reality is in what you do not see, in all that you do not see, all that you do not know. He says, which is not the true reality. God says the church is continuing to do what the church has continued to do. He says, in other words, the church is going to keep doing what the church is doing. The church isn't going to stop doing what it has always done. He said the church has not changed its course. The church has not examined its course. The church has not self-examined itself. He said the church is still not hearing. The church is still not hearing what is going forth. The church has not positioned itself to hear what is being spoken. He says the church is still failing to see. The church is failing to see what is clearly going on in front of them. The church is still failing to see what is happening right before them. The church simply will not see what is so clear to see. The church's virtual sight is still where it has always been. The church is still not positioning themselves to hear what is being spoken regarding this season. So people do not look at the church for your direction. The church is not where you're going to find your direction right now. Why? Because the church has lost its own direction. And the Bible says if blind folk lead blind folk, they'll both end up in the ditch. The church still feels as though it is exempt from the events of this season. The church still feels as though it is standing outside of the events of this season, as though the church has some form of exemption, as though the church within the season of this pandemic has some form of exemption status. So the church feels that we don't need to listen to this. We don't need to do differently. There's no need for us to change anything. Okay. The church does not have any form of exemption status, God says. The church is not exempt from the events of this season. The church is not exempt from the occurrences of this season. The church will not be able to speak its way out of the events of this season. He says, in fact, the church will play an intricate role in the events of this season. The church will become intricately acquainted with the woes, WOES, of this season. The church will be included in the woes of this season. Those within the church will share in the woes of this season. He says the people are dull of hearing because the preachers are dull of their hearing. The people's dullness of hearing is due to the preacher's dullness of hearing. Many people are going to be dull in their hearing because they're listening to preachers who are dull in their hearing, or people are going to remain dull in their hearing, not being able to perceive or discern. Why? Because the preacher's inability to perceive and to discern keeps the preachers from being able to hear correctly in order to teach people. He says the preachers are the reason for the condition of the people right now. It is the preachers of the church who are the main ones dull in their hearing. And because the preachers are unable to hear, the people are unable to hear. The people's hearing ability or inability is due to the preacher's hearing ability or hearing inability, inability to hear. The people's inability to hear is due to the preacher's inability to hear. The people's unwillingness to hear is due to the preacher's unwillingness to hear. God says, what I am giving you is to be heard. He says, you will be heard. Your words will be heard. Your voice will be heard in this season. You will receive a platform to be heard. Those of us who have substance, who have something to present to the world, there will be a platform for us. Your voice is due in this season. This is your due season. This is your season to be heard. He says you are not receiving what you're receiving just to be receiving. You are receiving what you are to hear because you are to speak what you are hearing. You are receiving what I am doing because you are to speak forth what I am doing. You are to tell the people what I am doing. You are to tell the people what is going to be. You are to show the people what needs to be shown. You are not to hold this in. You are not to keep what you are hearing to yourself. This is not just for you. This is not just for yours. This that you are receiving is to be told. You are to tell what you are hearing. You are to share what you have heard. You are to let the people know what you are hearing. You are to share what you are hearing. Do not shy away from speaking. Do not lessen your speaking because of the people not hearing. The people not hearing does not change what you are to speak. Do not concern yourself with whether the people hear what you're saying. Do not concern yourself with them hearing what you're saying. Your concern is to be on speaking what you are to speak. You are to concern yourself with speaking what you are to speak. You are to speak what you have heard, whether the people hear it or not. You are to speak whether they hear it or whether they do not. I am the one who causes the people to hear. I am the one who gives the people the ability to hear. God says it is up to me for the people to hear what you are saying. The people can only hear through me. He says, whoever does not hear you will hear you. Whoever does not believe you will believe you. Whoever does not believe what you are saying will believe what you are saying. Whoever does not see what you're saying will see what you are saying. Whoever does not trust what you have said will trust what you have said. He said, there is a remnant who will hear you. There are a people who will hear you. There is a great number of people who will hear you. There are a number of people who will agree with you. There are a people who can hear you, a people who will connect with your words. There is a number of people who will echo what you are saying. Continue to hear. Continue to speak as you hear what you hear. On July the 5th, God said to me, and I'll give a backdrop of what was happening on July the 5th. This is just 2 days later. Of course, this is all 2020. This message resulted from the cold shoulder that I had again been receiving from people while trying to have necessary conversation regarding the type season this world is currently involved in. After inquiring with those that I have known for years and who are active in church ministry, after inquiring with those or speaking with those, not that I necessarily was necessarily reaching out to them, not necessarily, but I was saying, are you hearing anything? Is God saying anything to you? So after inquiring with those that I have known for years and who are active in church ministry as to whether God was saying anything to them regarding this season, I realized once again that people are just not where I thought they would be by this point. I am sadly amazed at where people are in God and as to what they still do not know regarding him in this current season. I am equally dumbfounded by the fact that most people, even those in public ministry, do not hear God in the smallest way. I am really disheartened by this truth, especially since it makes me look as though I have somehow missed God and am the one in question and in error. I am once again disheartened by people's lack of regard and their absence of any humility in their response to what I was trying to convey to them in relation to what God has been saying to me regarding the seriousness of this season. This disturbed me, more so in a sad way, though, just how blind, deaf, prideful, arrogant, and hardened people are, especially those who see themselves as the so-called church, and even more with greater personal disturbance and emphasis with those who are preachers. It is, God said to me, this is a season where unique experiences are occurring. This is a season of uniqueness. This was his response to me. This is a season of unique occurrences. He says, you are receiving a unique message. You are receiving a message that is unique. You are receiving a message that is unique to this season. You are receiving a message that is unique to you. You are receiving a message that is uniquely given to you. You are receiving a message that others have not received. The things that I am saying to you regarding this season are not widely known. Most people are not in tune with what you know. The greater majority of people are not aware of what you are aware of. And this is also to those who you know that God is giving you something and you're not being received, and what's being said is not being taken. It's being taken as a joke. It's actually almost or definitely being mocked. You're being mocked. God says you are receiving a message that others are not seeing. You're receiving a message that others cannot receive. You are receiving a message that others refuse to hear. You are receiving a message that others are afraid to hear. He says the messages that you are hearing are frightening to others. People are frightened by the messages you are to speak. People are fearful of the truth. These messages that you are hearing are not pleasant messages. The messages that you are hearing are not easy to be embraced. The messages that you hear are not easy to receive. Doesn't give you all an excuse to how you behave toward the message itself, but these are not going to be easily received. But you're not justified because you're touchy and your emotions are there, whether it's your fearful emotions or your religious emotions or whatever it is. That doesn't give you an excuse. You'll still be accountable for what you did not hear, for what you did not take heed to. People are not, remember your Bible says, my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. Well, what about those who rejected knowledge? Really, that verse says, for my people, I wrote a book on it, literally, for my people are destroyed for the lack of knowledge. My people are destroyed, dismantled. They dismantle themselves for the ignorance. The lack of knowledge is just the definition for ignorance. Look at it this way. My people are destroying themselves by ignoring. Because ignorance, ignoring what you're hearing. He says people are not easily embracing the message that you're speaking. They're not hearing these messages, but it does not matter. It really does not matter, he says. There will be some who will receive the message, but there will be some who will not. He says many will not hear, but many will hear. He says the messages that I am giving you are not going to be received by some. Some people are not going to receive what you are saying, and some people are going to receive what you are saying. You almost say, duh, but no. Some people will reject this message. This message, or the message of this season, will be rejected by some. Some people will reject what you have to say regarding the general message of this season. People will speak against the general message of this season. People will refuse to hear the message of this season, but you must continue to speak what you are to speak. You must continue to say what you are to say regarding this season. You must continue to stand in what you know. Stay in what you know. Stay with what you have heard. Do not concern yourself with who does not hear you. Do not concern yourself with those who do not hear what you are saying. Do not concern yourself with where others may be in their hearing. Where others may be as it relates to their ability or their willingness to hear is not where you may be. But you cannot speak to people from the standpoint of where they may be. God says, basically, do not dummy down the message because of where other people are in their belief, in their religion, in how they feel. He says you cannot speak according to how others may feel or according to how others may think. You cannot speak to the present state of others. I can't speak to your present state. I got to tell you what the present state is in what God is doing. But I can't speak to your present state of ignorance or your present state of ignoring, your present state of disobedience, your present state of being deaf. You cannot speak to the present state of others. Your speaking cannot cater to where people may be as it relates to their ignorance. You cannot speak to the ignorant state of people. You cannot speak according to where people may be in their state of thought. He says your speech cannot be geared to the ignorant thoughts of others, the ignoring thoughts of others. You cannot allow the shallow thinking of others to form your thinking. Do not allow their thoughts to form your thoughts. That's a good one. Do not allow their thoughts, their ignorant thoughts, their thoughts due to their ignoring. Do not allow those thoughts to form your thoughts. Do not allow their words to dummy down your words. You cannot let the thought state of others cause you to speak differently. You cannot let what or how others are thinking to cause you to put aside what and how you are to be thinking. Let them think whatever and however they may think, but you continue to think in accordance with what I am telling you. You are to follow what I am telling you. You are to go with what I am telling you. You are to go with what I am showing you. What I am telling and showing you is what you are to think. What I am telling and showing you is what you are to speak. You are to stay on course with what I am saying to you. Those of you who are hearing this and you know God has said things to you, take heed to what is being said. Stay tuned to what you know. Stay tuned to your own intuitions. Stay tuned to what I am saying to you. Stay tuned to what you hear. What you hear is what you ought to stay in tune with. Stay in tune with what you hear. Stay in tune with what you know. Stay with what you know. Stay true to who you are. Stay true to what you know. Stay true to what you hear. Do not turn from what you have heard. Do not turn away from what you hear. Do not turn away from what you have learned, from what you know. You are to operate from the aspect of what you know and understand rather than from the aspect of what others know and understand. You are to speak from what you know, not from the aspect of what others claim to know. Whether or not others know and understand what you know and understand is not important as it relates to what you are to speak. What others know and understand in comparison to what you have come to know and understand is not to be your concern. What you ought to concern yourself with is what you have come to know and understand. You are to let your experiences lead you rather than the people. You are not to be led by the thinking of others. You are not to let other people's thoughts lead you in your way of thinking. People's ways of thinking are not to be your ways of thinking. Their thoughts are not to be your leading. People's thoughts are not to be your guide. You are not to be guided by the ignorance of others. You are not to let the ignorance of people steer you away from what you know. Do not let their thoughts become your thoughts. Do not let how they think steer you away from how I have enlightened you to think. How you think is not in accordance with how other people think. How you hear is not in accordance with how other people hear. Your thoughts are different because your hearing is different. Your hearing is different because the source of your hearing is different. Who you hear from, who you receive your hearing from is different. What you know is greater than what others may know. What you know is from a greater source than that of other people. Your source for knowing is of a greater source than what other people possess. Other people possess a knowledge that is from a lesser source. Their knowledge is from a much lesser source than yours. Such people are only speaking in accordance with their source's knowledge. They are merely speaking from the limitations of the knowledge base of their sources. Everyone is limited to the content of their source. The source that you pull from determines the content that you possess. A source that is limited in its contents will render content that is limited by its source. For the limitations of your content are in accordance with the limitations of your source. So if you have a limited source, then the content that you receive from your source will be limited. But if you have an unlimited source, the content that you receive from that source will be of an unlimited magnitude. People are speaking, God says, from within the contents of their lesser sources, just as you should be speaking from within the contents of your greater source. Just as others are speaking from the limited contents of their sources, you too should be speaking from the limitless content of your source. Do not speak according to the limitations of other people's sources. Do not let the limitations of other people's sources limit you to the limitations of their sources. Just because they don't know it, don't limit what you know based upon the limited information that they receive from their limited sources. Their limitations are not to be your limitations as it relates to how you know, how you understand, how you believe, and how you share. You are to teach from the aspect of what you both know and understand, even if others do not know what you know and understand. Regardless of how much others may know or understand, you are still to teach what you both know and understand. If others are not thinking in accordance with what you have been taught to think, do not turn from what you know to suit their thinking. Do not let others steer you away from what you know. Do not let others steer you away from what you know. Do not get away from what you know. Do not move from what you know. Do not put down what you know. Do not put aside what it is that you know. Trust what you know and then speak what you know. Trust and speak just what you know. Hold to what you know. Hold to what you have been taught. Speak in accordance with what you know regarding this season, not according to the limitations of what people possess regarding this season. Do not limit the source of your information because of the limited sources of their information. Just as others feel that their source is or are to be trusted, you are to feel the same way about your source. My source, meaning God, is to be trusted. You are to trust your source of information. Do not let others determine for you the trustworthiness of your source of information. Trust what you know. Trust what you have been taught. Trust what you have been told. Trust what you have been told. Twice he said that. Know what you have been told. Stick with what you know. Stick with what you know. Twice he said that. Trust what you are receiving. Trust what you are hearing. Trust what I am speaking. Trust what I am giving you. Trust what you are getting. Trust what you have received. Trust your experiences. Trust what you have experienced. Trust what your experiences have taught you. And I can say an assurance that where I am is because of my experiences. Where I am is because of the divine experiences of my reality, the divine experiences that did not match up with scripture, the divine experiences that were assigned to my destiny. God says your hearing is not on the same level as others. Some of you are hearing things that's just not on the same level. Almost everything that God has given me to teach, not just regarding this pandemic season, but just in general, the teachings that God give me are revelational. I don't follow people's books. I don't follow any particular preacher's anything. I don't even listen to them. I've listened to several people in this pandemic season, not because I was looking for an answer, because I wanted to see, where are these preachers at? Let me see if they're getting in tune now that things are happening, now that it is upon us. The shift, the change is upon us. I was sadly mistaken, though, terribly mistaken. Your hearing is not on the same level as others, God says. I am taking you where others have not been. You have been taken to places where others cannot be. You are hearing what others cannot hear. Your seeing is not in line with what others are able to see. You see what others cannot see. You have seen what others are not willing to see. See, that's the key. A lot of times we are receiving messages. Well, actually, God has already preordained what we will receive. But the very messages that others will reject to speak are the very messages that God will give you to speak. I used to say to God for years and years in the early 90s, God, whatever you can't get other people to say, I'll say it. Give it to me. I'll tell the people. You have seen what others are not willing to see. Your hearing and your seeing are on a greater level than that of other people's. People are not going to perceive how you perceive. How you perceive is not how others perceive. That doesn't mean that your perception is wrong. How you perceive is wrong, but we perceive based on the level that we're at. We perceive based upon our ability, based upon concept, our perceptibility will not exceed our conceptual ability. If we can't conceive it, if we can't even form the concept of it, we won't perceive anything in regards to it, not necessarily. Our perception is limited by our concept, or you can say your concept is limited by your perception, how you perceive, whether you perceive. How you perceive is not how others perceive. Your source of information is different from other people's source of information, which makes how you perceive different from how they perceive. People are not going to perceive what you are perceiving or even as you are perceiving. See, people's perception will differ from yours because of the source of their perception versus the source of your perception. The source of why others perceive as they do is why they have such a different perspective on this season than you do. But just because other people's perceptions and perspectives are different from yours does not mean that you are to change the content of your perception and perspective to equal the content of theirs. Do not compromise your perception or perspective in order to line up with the perception or perspectives of other people. So I do not compromise what I perceive, what I've heard. Do not get rid of the perception or the perspective that you possess in order to digress down to the perceptions and perspective of others, mainly in regard to this season and to what is going on in this pandemic period and the divine workings of God. Stay in the perception that you possess. Stay with the perception that you have perceived. Stay with what you have perceived. Stay with what you have come to know. And that's where I stand, and that's where I stay, and I shall not move. I have not moved from the things that God has shown me throughout the years. And because of that, I am seeing now how others are having to come online with where I was then and was rejected because of it. They are now speaking forth that I was being rejected for then. Well, that's just how it is in this pandemic season. What I may be rejected for speaking today, God is saying, you don't worry about that. You just hold your ground. Stay put, stand your ground, and watch me do what I do. And I'm watching God do as he does. God says you are going to be seen as being different. Your difference is going to show forth. You are going to be misunderstood. Your difference is going to be public. Your difference is to be evident. Your difference cannot be hidden. You cannot get away from your difference. You are going to stick out. Your difference is going to be misunderstood. People are going to misunderstand you. People are going to mishear what you are saying. People are going to misinterpret what you say. People are going to be perturbed by what you say. People are going to dismiss what you say, but you must continue to say. You must continue to say what it is that you know. You are to continue speaking the message that you are speaking. You are to stay on course with what you are speaking. Stay on course with the message. You are not to change the course of your message. Keep the message consistent. You are not to shun away from the message of this season. You're not to shun away from the message of this season. Twice he said that. You are not to turn away from the theme of this season. Stay with the theme of this season. Stay with the themed direction of this season. Do not change the direction of this season. Do not change the direction of the message of this season. Stay with the direction that this season is directing you. Listen, people, the direction of this season is not in the direction of prosperity and wealth at this point in stage. The direction of this season will very well bring us into a state of, but not before we go through a state of everything but wealth and prosperity and all of that other stuff. That, remember, there's a time and season for all things. Understand the season we're in. That's why I don't change the message. People who call me back in March. I'm still speaking what I spoke in March here in October. Why? Because I'm not changing the message. You're not going to hear anything different. I'm not going to be swayed or persuaded by your ignorance, by your ignoring, by your rebellion, by your refusal to hear or to know anything differently. God says, stick with the direction of this season. Do not go in any other direction than what this season is dictating. Stay with the dictation of this season. He says this season will dictate itself. This season will dictate itself twice. This season will be dictated to by no one. No one will dictate this season. No one will dictate the direction of this season. The course of this season will be dictated to by no one. The course of this season will dictate itself. That's why the church has rejected it. That's why politicians are, the president, they're rejecting it. Why? Because they can't control it. Do not let others dictate to you. Do not let others dictate to you regarding this season. You are hearing what this season is dictating. You are hearing what this season is going to dictate. You are hearing the course that this season will take. You are hearing the course of events that this season will take. Trust the course of this season. Trust what you know regarding the course of this season. Trust what you know. Trust that things will occur just as you have come to know. If you don't speak with a conviction, then you can be persuaded, and you will be persuaded in your own mind. There's a verse in the Bible that says, let every man be convicted, every man be convinced in his own mind. Trust that the events that you have been told regarding will be just as you have been told. Trust that the events of this season will be in accord with what you know. I will not leave you alone in this. And people need to know that, especially those who are called forth to hear. Listen to what God said to me, and you apply it to you if you see where it applies to you. I will not leave you alone in this. I will not let you be left in the public's eye. I will not let you be left to defend yourself. I will not let you be left to defend the words that you have spoken. I will keep the words that you speak. I will defend the words that you speak. I will defend what you say. I am not going to leave you in this. Now, of course, God is defending the words that he has spoken that we speak. Now, when we go out there and we speak for things that God did not speak, God defending those words is something different. I am not going to leave you defenseless. I am not going to leave you to defend yourself. I am going to make good on what I am saying. Things are going to be just as I am saying, God says, you have not been misled. You are not misled. You are not being misled. No one is misleading you. Do not move away from what you know. Do not get away from what you have heard. You've heard correctly. You're hearing correctly. You're hearing what is going to be. You're hearing the things that will occur. You can trust that these things will occur. You can trust what you are hearing in this season, that what you are hearing in this season is going to occur. You are not thinking something that is not going to be. You're not thinking what is not in accordance with what is going to be. Everything is going to be just as I have spoken to you. Everything is going to occur just as I have stated to you. Stay strong in what you hear. Stay strong in what you know. Stay true to what you know. Stay committed to what you know. Stay committed to what you have been told. Stand strong. Stand convinced. All who have refused this message will be shown the truth of this message. Those who refuse to hear or to receive the truth of this message will be shown in the wrong. People who do not believe the validity of this message will be proven to be wrong. They will be proven to be at fault. They will be proven to be the true deceivers. I will defend my message. I will defend you. I will defend what you're doing. I will defend what you are speaking. I will prove you to be true. I will prove you to be the one speaking the truth. I will prove that you do hear from me. I will prove that you were right. People will see that you are right and that what you are saying is true. Well, when God begins to give you messages like that, you might as well buckle down and realize, you've given me something that's going to be rejected, that people are going to talk about, they're going to slander and whatever else. And here you have the message that God has given me. Now, I can only imagine how some people will take this, especially in relation to the church and in relation to how I come off and how I say what I say. But there's a uniqueness about what God has given me, and I say it and I don't speak against it and I don't take down from it. It is what it is. I am not for everybody, but I am for some. And that some must hear what I have to say in the manner that I say it. And they will. They may struggle with it, but they will accept it if they are truly to hear it. It is what it is. Some people just want an excuse to not hear, to not have to listen to. So they'll find fault somewhere on the edges of what you say in order to. What I say is what I'm hearing God say. It is what it is. And it will be whatever God says it will be. And it's not enough for you to say, well, it'll all be whatever it's going to be, whatever it's going to be. Oh, well, God does what God's going to do. Okay. Oh, well. No. How do you prepare when you don't even know? In order to prepare, you must know what is coming forth. You must know how to prepare. If you don't listen, or if you don't come to know, but you just say, well, whatever happened, it happened, and God is... No, that's not wise. You prepare. The Bible talks about wise counsel. But anyway, it is what it is. It's a lot. I brought forth a lot. We have at least one more recording of with this particular topic. And then beyond this topic, we'll go to, this is the last topic that we'll cover. And at this point, I'll begin to edit all of my recordings, which are many, and I'll begin to upload them. And hopefully you all will listen to them in the order that they're laid out on the podcasting sites or YouTube or Facebook or whatever that you go to listen to them. These messages are all in audio. This would be a lot to put in video, a whole lot. That would be very difficult because of the content, because of the substance, the weight of the substance. But I will bring forth videos of certain things in relation to this pandemic season. But I'm putting the majority of it out in audio at this point. November the 3rd is approaching, fast approaching. I don't know how many I'll be able to get up in that, because we're talking at least 50 recordings. So that's at least 70, 80, 90, maybe 100 or better hours to put forth. So that will be 5 24-hour periods for the most part, 4 to 5 24-hour periods. That's a lot of, but anyway, it takes a lot to do what I'm doing, but I'm giving it to you free. You're not going to find many people doing that. I'm giving it to you free. I'm not even charging you for it. I'm saying take it if it's for you. If it's not, just keep it moving. Just keep it simple. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. On the next one.